Just think of a teddy bear. So anyways, those are the male criteria. Female criteria, all respondents. Correlation between socioeconomic status and frequency of simultaneous partners. For men it was 0.49. That's a big correlation. For women it was 0.04. That's zero, fundamentally. So the correlation between male socioeconomic status and frequency of simultaneous partners is 0.5. It's a huge effect. For women it's zero. Now that's a big difference. So, you know, one of the things you might ask yourself too, I don't know if this is a reasonable thing to ask or not, but I've always thought that the hard people to explain are the people who are hyperachievers, you know, the ones who are way out on the Pareto distribution. And there aren't very many of them, and they're usually men. You know, so if you look at the median number of publications, for example, that a female academic makes and a male academic, they're pretty much the same. But the mean for men is higher, and that's all driven by a small subset of men who are way the hell out in the Pareto distribution. Now you might ask, well, why is that? Well, it's simple. If you want to be way out on the Pareto distribution, so you're in the top, say, 1% of performers, or even 1/10 of 1% of performers, what do you have to do? Well, first, having an IQ of like 145 or above, that's really helpful. Then you should be insanely industrious. So maybe you'll work 90 hours a week, or 100 hours a week, at nothing but your stupid occupation. And maybe you'll do that for like 50 years. And so if you do that, well, you're going to be in that top 1 in 1,000 category. Well, the issue isn't why there are so few women in that category. The issue is, why are there any men at all in that category? Right? Because it's an insane lifestyle in many ways. You know, it means that there isn't much left there for the rest of your life. You're hyper-concentrating on a single thing. Now, why would men do that? Well, here's a hypothesis. One of the things that drives the probability that a woman will find a man attractive enough to sleep with is his status. So then you can think, well, that's an extra motivational boost for men. Now, whether that's conscious motivational boost or not is not the point. The question is it a boost that might have been instantiated as an evolutionary element of general motivation? Well, men are more competitive, they're more disagreeable, and if they're more disagreeable and more competitive, they seem to do better, especially in high-status jobs, and then women are more likely to pick men like that for sexual partners, so at some point it becomes difficult to avoid the conclusion, especially since we know that the men on the way out on the tail end of the Pareto distribution are disproportionately likely to sleep with many women. So Warren Beatty, I think, 15,000? That was his estimate. 15,000 women. And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the basketball player, he figured 10,000. So for every one guy who's got those numbers racked up, that's 10,000 guys who don't. So the male success distribution is extreme, and it's associated with outlier success in some important dimension of socioeconomic success, and then female reproductive opportunity is not. So, you know, is that relevant? Well, you know, it depends on how you think. It's hard for me to see that it can't be relevant. So, questions? You had a question?
Like, so what that means is the higher the job, like the higher their status, the more partners they have? Oh.
Yep. Okay. Yep, absolutely. And like this is a single study, but this data is common. Now, there's some interesting correlates of this. So, for example, you might say, why are males much more likely to engage in homicide? And Daly and Wilson figured this out a long while back, and what they showed was a very, very cool study. They took the level of income inequality in each county in the US and in Canada, and then they correlated that with the homicide rate. And what they found was that the higher the rate of inequality, so the more people at the bottom and the fewer people at the top, the higher the male homicide rate. And the correlation was 0.8, something like that, 0.85. It was like It's the whole reason. So what happens is that when the competition between men gets intense because hardly anyone can win, then males start to kill each other. Now, Martin and Daly also tried to figure out if that was a good idea, so they studied Chicago. And what they found was, well, most male-on-male homicides are young men, and a lot of them, they're within race, and they're often in dominance disputes. It's like, you know, maybe it's a gang thing. And it's like, well, you shoot me or I'll shoot you. It's like who's victim and who's perpetrator is not that obvious. So what happens in Chicago? Well, typically, the charge is plea bargained down to self-defense. Then no one's willing to testify against the guy because, well, after all, he just shot someone. And then he's in prison for 2 years because that's the sentence. And then he's out in 18 months if he behaves reasonably well. So then he's killed someone and he's back on the street. And guess what? His status has increased substantially. So you can think about it as a socioeconomic / sexual decision. And we also know that as economic disparity grows, the social stability decreases. And the reason for that seems to be, well, mostly seems to be male-on-male aggression. And so what I think probably happens is that if there's a fair bit of chance for men to climb the ladder, then only the most disagreeable of them become violent. But as you crank down on the opportunities so that the competition gets more and more intense, the level of disagreeableness that it takes in order to catalyze aggression the level of disagreeableness that it takes to catalyze aggression starts to decrease. Until, if it gets so intense that there's no possibility for status, then the whole bloody society is going to flip over. Because the guys at the bottom, who are like all the guys, are going to decide that this is a stupid game and they'd rather flip the board over and, you know, set the markers to 0 and see how they come up in the new society. So, it's possible that one of the things that motivates revolutions in human society is excessive inequality. And the reason that that's a problem is because it's so tightly linked to male reproductive opportunity. So